Okay, then we're going to start. I welcome you all here in the room, and I welcome you all at online. First, one announcement before I announce the next speaker, just to keep an eye if you're interested on the various events we're having throughout the year. Especially there's an educational event happening in June, July. So if you're interested in education, have a look. There's a teacher academy. Just want to bring that to your attention because some people ask me about it and they didn't know. At the reception, there's a Foundation Focus that has a calendar of all our events. So for those interested in our events, especially interested in education, there are several events planned related to education in the coming months. And now, to announce why you're here, I'd like to announce Professor Krishna. I mean, originally, long time ago, professor of physics, and started working in Rajkot in 1984, just before Krishnamurti passed away, and has a long history with Krishnamurti. I met Professor Krishna, 20 years ago, maybe even longer, in the Netherlands, because Professor Krishna is I don't know how you call that, prolific traveler or extensive traveler. And he has published his own books. One of his books is available here in the shop, A Jewel on the Silver Platter. And his talk today will be Freedom from Conditioning. Thank you.
Thank you, Yap, for that kind introduction. Krishnamurti said that the very first requirement for learning is to free oneself of one's conditioning. It's not at the end of learning, it's at the beginning of learning. That's what he has said. Learning doesn't even begin until we free ourselves of our conditioning. So I want to inquire into this question afresh, as he himself pointed out, that one should always approach a question afresh, not from one's readings and not from opinions of other people and so on, but simply start with observation, your own questions and inquiry, and use common sense to come, because ultimately it's what understanding you receive through the investigation of the question, that is what you receive from it. His famous statement is that the answer is not outside the question, it lies inside the question. And so you must investigate the question on your own, and then whatever truths come to your mind, that's what you receive in that investigation. And it's the truth that acts on consciousness, not your will or your decision to alter consciousness. So I want to investigate this question, though it's an old question and also has been discussed quite a lot also in this gathering. But when you want to come to it afresh, you have to do it all over again, starting from first principles. So I ask myself, what is conditioning? And what do we mean, freedom from conditioning? When a child is born, he already has the biological conditioning hardwired in his brain So the biological instincts, tendencies, the genetic code, all that is already present. And accordingly, the body develops, and to a large extent, the mind too, because they now know that the genetic code also determines to a large extent our temperament, our aptitudes, and so on. So that conditioning is there, and Krishnaji said it's millions of years that has created the brain. It's not your brain, it is the human brain which you inherit when you are born. And that contains this. And that part of the past is common to all of us. Because the biological past is millions of years, and that is common to all of us. So our bodies, our consciousness, our brain are very, very similar. Next, one is born in a particular family, in a particular country, and one acquires the religion of that family, the moral values of that family. And a small child is very dependent on his parents for guidance, for everything, because the young one of a human being, unlike the young one of an animal, doesn't become independent in 2-3 months or 6 months, but remains dependent almost for 15-20 years. So the entire development of consciousness is also there in the case of the human being. And for all this, he feels secure within his family, with his parents. And it is required also because if he was not attached to his parents, he would wander off and cannot manage on his own. So it would be a danger to him. So that's almost an instinct. Nature has put it there for survival. You see that in animals too, that they are clinging to their mother for protection, and so does the human child, clings to its mother and father. And therefore, a certain amount of attachment naturally develops between the offspring and the parents. And he feels secure in belonging to his home, his parents, his brothers and sisters, his siblings, and so on. So that's how the conditioning begins. And it's not that all conditioning is a problem. There is quite a lot of healthy conditioning, innocent conditioning, which doesn't create any division or conflict or disorder within us. For instance, the particular form of music you grow up with, your brain develops a sensitivity to that music. So that particular food which your mother served, and so you like that. The form of dress that your environment people wear, those things don't create division or any problem. So it tells me that you need to examine your conditioning and not simply eliminate all conditioning. In any case, you can't do it because the conditioning is held in the brain cells as memory. And there is no way you can wipe out the memory in your brain, and you wouldn't want to do that either, because all the language and ability to think and speak, everything is held there. And if you wipe that out, you would have amnesia. And surely freedom from conditioning does not mean amnesia. So one must investigate what exactly are we supposed to be free from when the content of that conditioning is there in the brain has done its job of remembering things, its experiences, its environment, its language, and so on, and the knowledge that you acquire through school, college, university. All that is held in your memory. And so are the moral values and cultural values of the particular culture you grow up in. So all that is sitting there, and there is no way I can wipe that out. Then what does it mean, freedom? So that tells me that freedom from conditioning cannot possibly mean the absence of conditioning. And therefore one needs to examine one's conditioning and find out what part of it creates disorder in our consciousness, in our relationships, creates division, produces violence, and so on, what we call the negative emotions which arise. And one needs to free oneself only of that part. So Krishnaji would often say that every time you experience a negative emotion like jealousy or anger or conflict, it's an opportunity to learn about yourself, because it's something that is arising within you and it has a causation within you. And if you can understand that causation and free yourself of that causation, then it would go away. Now you can only free yourself of a causation that is not organic, which is what we call an illusion, something that you have taken as a construct of thought. It's not part of nature, it's not part of your body, but you have assumed it to be true. That constitutes illusion. It is not true, but it becomes true for you because you have accepted that, or you have heard that from childhood, and therefore you have never questioned it. I think it was Hitler who made this famous statement that the only difference between a truth and a lie is in the number of times it has been repeated. I'm not subscribing to it, but I mean that's one of the statements he did make. So one has to be guarded whether something has become true just because one has heard it a million times, or it is really inherently true. And you can only do that by examining. And he said, don't examine just intellectually. This inquiry is not just an intellectual inquiry. Intellectual inquiry will only change your opinions. You can read what the Buddha has said or what Christ has said and so on, and you can become a scholar in what they have pointed out. It's not false or wrong, but it won't transform your consciousness. And this religious quest is for a quest for transformation of consciousness. So in this quest, the truth is not a correct idea. The truth lies at the level of perception. It's only when you perceive what is true and what is false for yourself that the false ends. And if the disorder in consciousness was arising from that false, the corresponding disorder in consciousness will also end. So that is what this quest for truth or freedom from conditioning is about. It requires a lot of self-examination, which is not judging, it's not condemning, it's not justifying, it is not just explaining, but it's actually perceiving from what source the negative emotion arises within one. And so that needs a lot of attention. It's something that is happening within our consciousness. And if you pay a lot of attention and not get caught in opinions and so on, then you can sense the source from which it is arising, and that source is you. So that you can change provided you perceive that for yourself. But if you simply have an idea that the Buddha said it should not be so, or that anger is evil, the anger doesn't go because the cause of the anger is still there. So when religions prescribed certain actions as virtues and certain other actions as vices, and said we must practice virtue and avoid vices, eliminate vices. Human beings tried that in every religion, very hard. They tried to use their will to do that. And at the end of it, we see where we are, that it does not work. And that's one of the cardinal teachings of Krishnamurti, that virtue cannot be practiced. It's a state of being, a state of consciousness. And long ago, Socrates in the West had said the same thing. He had said, there is only one virtue, and that is order in consciousness. He also said, an unexamined life is not worth living. So I think Krishnaji is more or less pointing to that we need to examine our beliefs, our predilections, our knowledge, to see what is true and what is false. And as the false drops away, it's really a process of unlearning the false. Because all of us learn a lot that is false without knowing that it is false. It varies from culture to culture. Let me take a few examples. At the very superficial level, there are what we call superstitions. They are illusions. They can go away even with the study of science or intellectual inquiry. But while they last, they create a lot of fear. In India, there is a superstition that if you are going somewhere and a cat crosses your path, it's a bad omen. So I've seen even colleagues of mine, professors, turn their car around and take a different road because that fear is still there. Right from childhood, they have heard this. And in the Christian world, if you are allotted room number 13 or a seat number 13 in the aeroplane, it produces a certain amount of fear if you have been brought up with Christianity and with this notion that number 13 is somehow a bad omen for you. And there are more sinister superstitions. There are people who believe that we fall ill, it means that God is angry with you, and therefore you need to go to the temple and pray rather than go to the doctor and get medicine for it. And that can be very sinister because your child can die because of this kind of belief and so on. So like that, in every culture there are various superstitions which are the most superficial layer of illusions that get accumulated as we grow up in that particular culture. Then there is deeper conditioning, which is cultural. And those are the moral values that we are taught. And for centuries, both in the West and in the East, people have believed that women are meant to be assistants to men. They are meant to only breed children and provide a home and a hearth for the family. And that the outside job is all for man to do and not for a woman. Now that's just a construct of thinking, human thinking. It's not a fact of nature. Nowhere has nature said that women are meant to be assistants to the men. So that notion pervaded, and it still pervades in our society, in many societies around the globe, but it's a false thing, it's an illusion. To be able to see that and to free oneself of that is to perceive what is true and what is false. And this cannot be done through only thinking, because thought arises from our memory, our conditioning, and the conditioning is held in the memory, and it colors our thinking. So thought is a colored instrument, and with a colored instrument you cannot come to the truth. It's like wearing goggles, colored goggles, and then looking at the earth. Everything will look red or green depending on the color of the goggles. So this conditioning distorts your perception, and you don't see things the way they are. But a lot of you is projected into the seeing. And that means it prevents you from seeing what is true and what is false. For a long time, it was believed that children get spoiled if they are not punished. Throughout the 19th century, it was believed that spare the rod and spoil the child. Even today, in some places, it says that. And children are regularly beaten, both in school and in homes. It's an illusion, it's not true, because that fear causes a lot of psychological disturbance in the child and prevents its natural growth and intelligence from flowering. So those notions, then for a long time it was believed that kings are divine people and they are above the law and they could do what they like. That was a false notion. So like that, there are many notions, cultural notions. In the Islamic world, they think that a woman should not show her face to anybody other than her husband. It probably might have arisen in the 12th or 13th century when society was such that sheikhs were going around and any beautiful woman could be picked up and put in their harem and so on. So it might have arisen like that. I'm just guessing, I don't know. But now it has become tradition, and then that tradition is called culture. And in the Islamic world, they say that's our culture. We don't let our women play games or go out and show their face and so on. So you are imprisoning a girl child in your home and not allowing her to play outside and so on. You don't see the cruelty of it because you call it your culture. So unless you examine these things and unless you question everything, nothing is going to change. Tradition has such a strong hold. It's a very strong part of our conditioning, cultural conditioning. In modern times, the notion in society that it's very important to do better than everybody else at whatever it is, whether you are running or jumping or doing mathematics, you must be the first. So competition is taught to the child like propaganda. And the young child doesn't know, and so it takes it to be true. They say, yes, competition is necessary, and so on. Not true. It produces rivalry. It says that your classmate is not your brother or your friend, but your rival. It teaches discord in relationships. But because everybody is doing it, the mind gets trapped in that and accepts that as normal. The importance we give to somebody who jumps 1 millimeter higher than everybody else, and the feeling of nationalism, saying that if it's the German who jumped more than anybody else, therefore it's a victory for Germany, all that is just make-believe, psychological make-believe that the mind creates, and that's an illusion. It's not true. You're asking the wrong question. You should be asking, did they enjoy their jumping? That's more important than who jumped a little bit more than anybody else. But we are all trapped in this. If you notice it in yourself, if you see a game happening in television, you side with your own countryman in that. So you are oblivious to the excellence of play in that game, and you are all the time wanting your own countryman to win. That's just a psychological thing which our own mind creates. So there are all these cultural illusions we grow up with and we accept. You know, something is not an illusion if you know that it is not an illusion. A fairy tale is not true, but we know that it is not true. So then it does not constitute illusion. But when you take it to be true, when it's not a part of nature, and you can see that it is leading to violence or division, then it becomes something sinister. So religious belief is like that. We have had more wars in the name of religion than even in the name of property or land or nationality. And religion was really meant, the very word religion comes from religare, which means to bind together. So it was meant to unite. But since we have equated it with belief, not with the quest for truth, but with belief, belief can be anything. You don't need to believe that this is a light, you see that. You don't have to believe that that's the wall, you see that. When do you believe? When you don't know, you don't see that. When you don't know, why is it not enough to say, I don't know? Why do you need to believe something else? So the belief is an imaginary thing. The belief in God, a certain form of God which is taught in each religion. The mind accepts that, and that divides Hindus and Muslims, because what the Muslim has been told about God is something different from Hindus, is different from what Christians have been told, and so on. And so when you are attached to your particular form of illusion, it divides human beings. And division creates violence and wars. So the source of it lies in our consciousness. That's where the division originates. And Krishnaji's statement was that the world is the way it is because we are the way we are. You are the world. So there is casteism or communalism or religious bigotry in the world because it's there in our consciousness. And that's where it has to be eliminated. You cannot eliminate it just by propaganda or decision. And then there is also psychological illusions, what psychologists call complexes. They come from our own personal experience during our childhood and later on in life. So it may happen that a man is in love with a woman and she doesn't marry him, she goes off with somebody else, and this man generalizes from that and becomes a woman hater. Now that's a complex. Only one woman deceived him, but he now thinks the whole tribe of women are undependable, should not be trusted. It's the same thing when you say Muslims are this way or Hindus are this way and so on. You have seen only one or two examples of it, and you generalize and you attribute it to everybody in that whole group, and it becomes prejudice. So, psychological complexes, they lie still deeper in our consciousness, because if you have grown up with a lot of fear, you will find that that fear will manifest in your life later on, and you don't know from where it is arising. So psychologists try to dig into your past and determine the cause. But unless you can free yourself of the cause, it still operates, even though the explanation may be true, what they give. And deeper still in our consciousness is the feeling of being a separate individual. And Krishnamurti and other sages have pointed out that that's an illusion too. That thinking exists, but the thinker is a construct. That there is somebody inside there who is thinking, doing the thinking. And that there is an ego inside me, which is the me, which is taking decisions and acting. You can see that that is a construct because it depends on the manner in which you are approaching the relationship or the activity. If you don't approach it egoistically, there is no ego in it. And if you approach it egoistically, looking for some satisfaction, some motive, some purpose to it, some advantage to be gained, then there is the ego in it. So it depends on my approach, which means it's not a fact of nature. It's my doing, and I can unlearn it. You cannot decide to unlearn it, but you can watch the consequences of that in your life. So that's what Krishnamurti's teaching was. He said, watch your consciousness in the mirror of relationship. It reveals itself. And you have to become a student of your own consciousness. You have to approach what is going on in your consciousness with a learning mind, not a reacting mind, not a judging mind, not a condemning mind or justifying mind, but with a learning mind. Now, a learning mind uses not thinking, but awareness. It watches. And awareness is a faculty that we all possess, which is not a thought faculty. Thought, knowledge, ideas are all one plane of our existence that exists. Knowledge exists. Thoughts exist. And awareness is a different plane which is not created by thought. So you will find, for example, that when you look at a tree, you are aware of the whole tree. But when you have to describe the tree to your friend, you describe it bit by bit. You describe the stem and then the leaves and then the branches and then the height of the thing and the sky, color of the sky against which you are seeing it and so on. So that's the nature of thought. Thought is a useful tool for communication. But as we said earlier, thought is colored by our conditioning. And therefore it's not the right tool for the quest for truth. Because you cannot take a colored tool and come upon the truth. It would be like using a scientist using a microscope where the lenses themselves are distorting. Then he's not going to get an accurate picture of what he's trying to photograph. So just as the scientist needs to make his lenses free from aberration, we need to make our mind free from the aberration due to conditioning. And that's what it means, the freedom from conditioning. It's not the absence of conditioning, but once you realize this fact, the importance of your conditioning goes down. So long as you identify with it, so long as we call it my conditioning, my culture, my nationality, my religion, the fact that you are owning it blows it up, its importance in one's consciousness. After all, my opinion about anything, including Krishnaji's teachings, is also the opinion of a conditioned mind. And my friend's opinion about it is also an opinion of a conditioned mind. So what is the great importance? That it is my opinion. But you will find that we are all the time defending our own opinion as if that is the truth. So Krishna said, in dialogue, don't ask the question, am I right or are you right? Ask, what is right? Because if we differ from each other, there are 2 or 3 possibilities. Either you may be right, or I may be right, or both may be wrong. In that case, also you have a difference of opinion. So unless you examine it, and it requires a certain amount of humility and a certain amount of doubt, without which you don't have a learning mind. You have a defensive mind, an assertive mind, and you're only trying to convert other people to your opinion, which is a game of victory and defeat, which is an egoistic game. So this ego is a big barrier to learning. And one needs to, that is the ultimate illusion of mankind. I would put it this way, that humanity thinks, every human being thinks, that acting out of self-interest is in his self-interest. It's not. Because when everybody is acting out of his self-interest, that is how you get the kind of society that we have, with all these divisions and quarrels and conflicts and everything going on there. So it's an illusion, but it's a very pervasive illusion, not easy to get rid of. You don't feel one with the tree. You feel, I am here, and the tree is there, another object out there, like that. You don't feel one with the tree unless you have a mystic consciousness. Then you feel one with everything else. So long as the ego is there, and so long as I am separating myself and defending the me and the mine, that is what we call the ego. So it's the attachment to the conditioning that one needs to be free of. The conditioning you cannot be free of, in the sense that you cannot eliminate that. It is sitting there in the brain. The brain has done its job of remembering your experiences. But it's important to know that experience does not necessarily bring wisdom. If that was so, all old people should be wise, because they are much more experienced than young people. But that's not an observed fact. So obviously, experience, you can pick up a truth from an experience. You can also pick up a prejudice from experience. Illusions and prejudices are also collected from experience. You can often find a man telling his son, beware of falling in love. You know, I have had bad experience and so on. And I tell you, this hair has not grown gray for nothing. My wisdom tells me that, you know, women are not dependable and so on. He's just passing on his prejudice. Similarly, if the Israelis tell the Arabs, tell their children that Arabs are our enemies, and the Arabs tell their children that Israelis are our enemies, the hatred that is there in the parents gets transferred to the children. So how is that ever going to change unless we bring up the children to question what the parents are saying? But we bring them up to obey, not to question. And that's why inquiry is so important. If you don't inquire, nothing changes. Tradition is absence of inquiry, just repeating the thing mechanically. The way your father lived, you lived the same way, and so on. So it destroys creativity. So all that is part of our conditioning. And to be free from the conditioning, one needs to examine it with a learning mind. A learning mind says, I don't know what the truth is. This is what I have been told. This is what my culture has said. I don't know if it is true or not. If the Hindu said that I have been told something about God and that you should worship God in a temple with flowers and music and all that. And the Islamic man says, my father told me something else about Allah and how you should pray to them and so on. Both would become friends and they would say, neither of us knows what the truth is. So let's both find out what the truth is. And that's the relationship between two inquirers. They are friends with a difference of opinion. But neither of them is attached to their opinion. So that attachment is the ego. The attachment to my country, my family, my language, my religion, and so on. That whole content of the mind. And there is a certain callousness in this whole ownership, which we need to realize. When the Indian army suppresses the population in Kashmir or kills them, then some other country says, don't do that, that's not right, you're killing your own nationals, and so on. And India can say, mind your own business, see what's going on in your backyard, this is our national problem, we will solve it, none of your business. The same thing, a man beats his wife, and the neighbor comes and says, don't do that, not right. And the man retorts saying, you take care of your wife, she's mine, and I will deal with her. So there is a certain element of callousness in that. You are not willing to examine. As soon as you have this sense of ownership, and the feeling of protection comes, and your mind becomes like a personal lawyer defending the me and the mine. It's not interested in truth. It may say it is interested in truth, but you have to examine quite a lot before you can be sure that you are really interested in truth. Or whether you are seeking satisfaction, you are seeking security for the me and the mine, or profits for the me and the mine, all of which is ego activity. Now, through an ego activity, through an inquiry which is egoistic, you cannot come to freedom from the ego, because the means are not separate from the end. If the means are egoistic, the end will be egoistic. That's a fundamental law. And so you have to use the right means, which is why Krishna said the first step is the last step. If the first step itself is egoistic, right, then the last step will also be egoistic. And therefore, this freedom from conditioning is the first requirement before this learning as to what is true and what is false can start. And therefore, this initial questioning and examination, which reveals to you that you don't know, and wisdom begins with knowing that you don't know. That's true humility. So you need humility, you need enthusiasm. You need to do this for the love of it, not for achieving some end, because then that becomes egoistic. So that's the difficulty of this quest. And that's why there is a great resistance to it in the human consciousness. The human consciousness is not really interested in truth. It is looking for satisfaction. That's an instinct. The instinct of seeking pleasure and avoiding pain has become in man also psychological pleasure and psychological pain. So when somebody praises you, you purr, you feel happy. And when somebody criticizes you, you feel insulted, you feel hurt. That is a sign that there is an ego operating within you. And if you can watch that and learn about that and stay with that question without just condemning it and saying it should not be there or feeling remorse and so on, because that becomes another ego trip if you do all that judgmental things and so on. So if you can use all these negative emotions that arise in our life as an opportunity to learn about myself. Just as if there is a pain in my body, the pain is telling me, Krishna, you are not looking after the body, you are not doing things right by the body. But normally we have been taught to go to the doctor and he gives you a painkiller medicine, and therefore you cope with the pain, but you have not learnt what the cause behind it was. And we do a similar thing in our consciousness, that there is a cause why there is jealousy, there is a cause why there is violence within us. And instead of eliminating the cause, discovering and eliminating the cause, we try to cope with it. We learn to cope with it, how to manage the ego. And management of the ego doesn't solve any problem because the ego is still there. And so the problem will come back again and again and again. Anyone who has tried to suppress anger, you can suppress its manifestation, but the feeling will come again because the cause of that is within you and has not been eliminated. So this deep learning about oneself, what is called self-knowledge, is the only way to really free your consciousness of this disorder in our consciousness. And there is disorder in our life because there is disorder in our consciousness. And since there is disorder in our life, million such lives, the other man is yourself, constitutes the disorder in society. So the society is not separate from you and me. And the root cause of the problem lies within the consciousness of man. And the understanding of this begins with examining your conditioning and freeing yourself of the false. This examination is to discern what is true and what is false. People often ask me, how will you know that you have arrived at the truth? You don't know. But you have a galvanometer to tell you, just as the galvanometer is there to detect electric current in a circuit. You can watch your consciousness. If there is still jealousy, there is anger, there is hatred, there is boredom, there is worry going on in you, it's informing you that your mind is not clear. Find out where it's not clear and become clear. That's part of the learning of self-knowledge. And you have to approach yourself like a true friend. A true friend doesn't condemn you. He just shares with you whatever, your joys, your sorrows. He doesn't want anything from you. So you also have to be a friend to yourself, not judge and condemn yourself and so on, but learn together through watching. It's the learning that brings about change. And that is what Krishnaji said, that perception is real action. What we think is real action is a lot of people going there and taking decisions and so on. We have done that for 70 years in the Middle East. What has moved? Nothing. You are back to square one. Today there is bombs flying across the Middle East from Israel and Arabs. So is the situation in Kashmir after 70 years of action by United Nations, by various countries, diplomacy and all that. Because the disease has not been tackled. The disease is that the fact is that there is no difference between the Arab and the Jew. But they think they are very different, and that thought is based on illusions. So it's the illusions that divide us, not facts. And so it is important to free our mind of these illusions, which create so much havoc in our life and also therefore in society. So I think I'll end it here and we can have some questions. Sir, you have to use the microphone because we are on the streaming.
That'll make me all nervous asking my question, won't it? So what would you think about a middle-of-the-road type of approach whereby I say to myself, I see that I harbor some illusions despite my attempt to end them, but I'm going to work around them. I see that I think that the black guy sitting across the room from me is suspicious. And then I stop and I say, well, that's an illusion, so let me deal with it. It seems to me that that sort of approach, at least for me, is probably more realistic than hoping that I can achieve the sort of complete extermination of these problems that Krishnamurti talks about. I mean, what would you think about that sort of mid-level approach?
Yeah. The problem with mid-level approach is that it may help you to cope with that particular situation, but it will not eliminate the cause, and therefore the same kind of problem will arise again. So it has not removed the root cause of the problem, which is, why does the mind feel suspicious of other people? There is a deep-rooted reason why it is suspicious. Either it's coming from your past, that you have been deceived by other people, and therefore you suspect that some other people will also deceive me, and so there is this suspicion going on. So ultimately there is a lot of self-concern which creates this suspiciousness, and that is the source of it is the ego. So unless we can perceive the danger of approaching life egoistically, the ego will operate there because it's an instinct. It's the instinct of seeking pleasure, seeking security, seeking profit, as against its opposite.
We do Buddhist meditation, like a lot of practice in meditation. So I was wondering, what do you think, how meditation helps in removing our conditioning?
I can tell you what Krishnamurti has said about it. Ultimately, you have to try it for yourself. He said conscious meditation is not meditation, because the meditator is doing that meditation with a motive of getting rid of something or getting some advantage for himself. And so the ego is already part of the meditation. So that kind of meditation cannot free you from the ego process in there. But he said this inquiry, which is not just an intellectual inquiry, but an existential inquiry, which uses all your senses, including your emotions and your thinking and so on. The trouble with philosophy is that it has become all intellectual. And intellect and reason have their own place in the inquiry, but they originate from, or they are colored by your conditioning, and therefore they are not free instruments. They have the value of creating the question, but they can't answer the question at the level of perception of truth, because they are not perceptions, they are ideation. So this, coming to the idea of the truth, there is a path to it. You can read what the Buddha has said, or what Jesus Christ has said, and what other people have said about that, and you will know the truths that they have pointed out, or Krishnamurti, what Krishnamurti has pointed out. But it is not at your level of perception. You haven't perceived that for yourself. There is a dialogue between Krishnamurti and the students at Brockwood, which is there on a video, where he is telling them the words of the Buddha and of Jesus Christ are illusions for you because you have not perceived the truth of that for yourself. And one student asks him, "Sir, aren't your words also illusions for us?" And he says, "Yes, if you accept them." If you just accept a statement on the authority of the teacher, it doesn't increase your understanding of it. If you deny it, also it doesn't increase your understanding. So when you hear a statement, agreeing with it and disagreeing with it are both two opposite but equally unintelligent responses to that statement. So what is the intelligent response? The intelligent response is, if I listen to it and ask myself, what exactly does he mean? The words have been used to convey meaning. What is the meaning? And if you're not sure, you can ask him, is this what you mean? Then the deeper question is that true? And for that, don't use your knowledge and your belief system, because that's your own conditioning, to get the answer. You watch in your life, you stay with that question, watch in your life and get it through awareness and watching. So in that way, it is very similar, I find, to the scientific quest, where science also depends on experimentation, on observation, to find out what the truth is, and not simply on ideation. But there is a certain scientific method which can be used there, because science is objective. When you are studying a star or a planet in motion and so on, your desires don't mix with it. You can be quite objective. But when you are watching yourself and looking at it, the subjectivity is extremely intense, and it's very difficult to be completely objective in your perception. So that's the difficulty of the religious quest. So Krishnamurti said this learning, which is part of self-knowledge, is part meditation. Without this, meditation will not happen. But by itself, this is not meditation either. It's part of meditation. Something like preparation for meditation, if you like. Yes, Sudeep. Andrew, watch for hands going up.
Thank you, Dr. Krishna. Thank you so much for speaking so fluidly and without notes. Just it was beautiful to see the flow. Assuming that we as individuals have examined and have brought that runaway train to a stop individually, and then now we examine and observe what is happening in the world, and we feel a sense of urgency that something ought to happen, or at least we see that there is something out there that I'm just curious at this point, juncture, 50 years from KFA, and we as not just all the different 8 schools, but also as we as part of that larger community, as people, as stewards of good living, good being. I'm just curious, how, just to share from your perspective, how do we go about in the world as we go out after tomorrow, May 6th and beyond? Vision next 50 years or even 2 days from now, if we feel a sense of urgency about the world and about the duality and about Pakistan and Kashmir and all the things that are there, not just so far away, but even close by, just curious to hear just how to deal with it and how to carry on our life. Definitely not the same way as yesterday, but I'm just feeling a sense of how do we steward ourselves as individuals and as a society, as a group, as a people, just touched by something profound that you have personally experienced, but also even now today and yesterday as we are hearing, listening in the Oak Grove. I'm just curious, just some thoughts. Just
Yeah,
wondering.
and
Thank you.
You know, there is a very deep causation behind what is happening in society. And it is rather naive to think that we can change that causation. Because it's like there are 7 billion egos operating in the world. And we want that there should be peace. Right? The ego is the cause of conflict in each individual. And so each one of us is contributing to the violence in the world. This is a little difficult to understand, but let me give you an example of it to perhaps make it clearer. When Gandhi was murdered, Krishnamurti was giving a talk in Bombay on 30th of January 1948. And at the end of his talk, somebody asked him, who was responsible for the murder of Gandhi? And Krishnamurti said, each one of you who is divided from his fellow man on the basis of caste, on the basis of religion, on the basis of nationality, is responsible for that murder. Of course, the society and the police will catch hold of the man who pulled the trigger. But ask a deeper question. Was that man born a murderer? He was born a child in this society. How did he become murderer? Who is responsible? What kind of education did we give him? What kind of bringing up? And that is the education which all of us together have set up, because that's our notion of education and so on. So there is much deeper causation, but there is a tendency to think that only those people are responsible for it who are involved there. No, we share the same consciousness, and Krishnamurti is saying all of us are contributing to the violence in the world, but we don't realize that. And therefore, what you can at best do is to end it here, in you. And this idea of trying to end it out there is an escape from doing the work that you really need to do on yourself. Because it feels good. It's very satisfying that I'm feeling great compassion for those people in the Middle East and so on, and I want to do something and so on. You haven't solved your own life's problem, right? And you are out there trying to solve that problem. You have no idea what it is like. So while the thought may be noble, but it's a way of feeling noble without being noble. Yeah.
Thank you for your thank you for your discussion. You speak quite a bit about the ego and how our conditioning is so impacted by the ego. And you talk about how we have to try to see things truthfully as they are in order to try to keep that ego from getting out of control. But it seems to me that, I mean, and I agree with that, the ego seems to be the root of everything.
Yeah.
But I think one of the biggest egocentric problems that we have is to keep thinking that we can figure it out. And what I mean by that is that when I look at my own perceptions of the world, I see that I make mistakes. I see that I fall under illusion. I see that I jump to conclusions. I see that I'm conditioned. And it seems to me the very first question, or the very first thing, if we're really going to be truthful with ourselves, is to recognize it's such a huge sticky bear, or a tar baby, whatever analogy works, that you can't figure it out. And that's why there's so much trouble. Because just as you rightly said, you have the Christians saying, well, we figured it out. You have the Hindus saying, we figured it out. You have all these different, and now the Krishnamurti people are saying the same thing. We figured it out also. So I don't really feel like what I'm hearing here is, and it's presented in different words, but the end conclusion seems to be the same as all the other traditions. Is like, well, we figured it out. So I think the real question is to admit that we can't figure it out, and then try to figure out from there what the alternative, what, how to proceed from that point. So could you please speak on that?
Yes, please. First of all, sir, there is no such thing as Krishnamurti people. No, seriously. He refused to have disciples. He refused to make a religion. He refused to let people propagate his word. I think 1948 in Madras, there was a man who asked him a question. And at the end of his talk, he said, "I'm very enthusiastic about your teaching. I would like to spread it. Tell me what is the best way to do it." And he gave a longish reply, but this essence of it was, "Sir, don't try to spread the teaching. You will only spread the word, and the word is not the teaching." So the teaching is that we need to inquire and come upon the truth for ourselves. He cannot give us the truth, and memorizing his answers is not truth for us. So you need to investigate what he is saying. He kept on saying in every talk, if you go back more or less on any video, he said, "Sir, I'm not trying to convince you of anything, and don't just accept what I am saying. What I am saying is not the truth. What is written in the book is not the truth, but it is pointing to the truth. It contains the truth. But you have to investigate it and come upon the truth for yourself, because the truth, religious truth, is not an idea. It is a perception. It is when you perceive what is true, the false ends. And when the false ends, the illusion ends, the disorder corresponding to it in your consciousness ends. Because you then approach life differently. So he is basically pointing out that we are ourselves the authors of our own sorrow, but we don't know it. We think that our sorrow is produced by the outer world or the neighbor and so on, but actually it is originating from within us. And so to take responsibility for what we are, and the only way you can change is to learn about yourself. So the transition, as I understand it, which he is asking us to come upon, is not some sort of achievement, but to begin to approach oneself with a learning mind, also the life with a learning mind, not a reactive mind. If I might illustrate that with an example, supposing you are walking on the road and you trip on a stone, what is the reaction of a normal man? He blames the town government, he gets angry that, look, they didn't remove that stone from the road, and I have now fallen and I can't go to my office. And he's full of complaint, and he goes to the doctor, and the doctor gives him some medicine, and he goes home. So he has learned nothing about himself. He has learned about the town government's inefficiency. Now, if he had a learning mind, he would ask himself, well, why did I not see this stone while I was walking on the road? And if he is honest and he wants to learn about himself, he will say, because I wasn't watching the road. Why was I not watching the road when I was walking on the road? Well, because I was thinking of something in my office. Why was I thinking of something on the office when I was walking on the road? Oh, because I feel that that is very important, and these trees and this road I have seen many times, and I can see it again. And therefore my attention was about the problem in my office. Why is it more important, the problem in my office? Well, because it's connected with my promotion, what my boss thinks about it, and I'll get more money, ultimately. So he has learned so much about himself that if he is ambitious about his office work, and so on, that is connected with your being absent-minded and falling on the stone. He has learned a lot about himself, and he needs to change that. Whenever you are very ambitiously going after something, you are using that time to only go in that direction. And anything else that is away from that direction becomes what we call waste of time. So your child comes and asks you to solve his homework problem, and you say, I don't have time, I have to go to my office, ask mama, like that. It affects your relationship with your child and your sense of time and leisure in that. So everything is connected with the fact that I am approaching my office work ambitiously and trying to use time to go in that direction. And I'm giving tremendous importance to my promotion, all of which you don't question. So that is the ignorance within us. So he's saying, doesn't matter, you fall on the road. Approach that with a learning mind, and we will begin to learn. And if you are only reacting all the time, you don't learn a thing about yourself. You keep reacting, and you want to win every reaction. So when you quarrel with your friend, you are reacting and you want to be victorious. And that's exactly what the ego does. Instead of learning from the situation, I want to control the situation and be victorious in that situation. That is essentially the egoistic mind, and therefore the egoistic mind is not a learning mind. That change from the egoistic, reacting mind to the learning mind is the religious step, because that learning mind is the religious mind. The reacting mind is not a religious mind.
Hi, Professor Krishna. Thank you for this opportunity to learn from you. Your story about how in China, competition is kind of sold as propaganda, that really resonated with me. Growing up in Chinese culture, that is ingrained in me. And my question is, what is the approach for appropriate action in an environment where to survive, your skill in competition almost is essential? So for example, if I had a excruciating pain in China and I wanted to go to the emergency room, as soon as I got there, I'd carry a big wad of cash with me, because as soon as I got into the emergency room, I would be paying off the doctor, because otherwise my wait time is going to be 3 days, and I'm in too much pain, so I'm going to jump myself to the front of the line. And I'm going to be competitive about it because I have no other choice in that moment. So, but what would be the appropriate action in that example, and also living in China in general, when it seems like every single moment requires some kind of a competitive play?
There is no simple answer to this question. In practice, you have to also cope with the problems, practical problems you are facing in your society. But you have to know that just doing that is postponing the problem. Your own intelligence will tell you what to do, and that intelligence comes from self-knowledge and wisdom. That wisdom tells you what to do. I'm reminded of a talk Krishnamurti gave in the United Nations, I think in 1984, in some society, not General Assembly, Parchamenteris Society, Peace on Earth Society. And he talked there about this national division and wars and so on, violence. And at the end of his talk, a man got up and asked, all this talk about non-violence is well and good, but what should you do when a robber attacks you? And his answer was, sir, first learn to live peacefully, not for 1 day or 1 week or 1 month, but for 20 years. Then, when the robber attacks you, you will know what to do. In other words, you want the answer without the homework. You have to do your homework first. You come upon wisdom, and your wisdom will tell you what to do. And self-knowledge is the key to wisdom. So that is what is necessary. It does not mean that it will solve all your practical problems in the particular society where you are living. Your own wisdom will tell you. I mean, if you chase sex in Saudi Arabia, you will get executed for something which you do every day in America. So you have to be realistic of the environment and protect yourself from it. There is no answer to every situation. But one thing is certain, without wisdom it will always go wrong. That is certain. That with wisdom it will all solve, not certain. But first come upon the wisdom and then see. And wisdom is not just knowledge. Knowledge doesn't bring wisdom.
I think you just maybe could repeat that for my answer, but I was going to ask regarding self-concern in the learning mind, beyond conditioning that we've acquired in terms of externalities like nationalism and tribalism and prejudice, what about when the me, with all this self-concern, meets truth that it does not exist or that it is a contrivance? Won't it still have that self-concern in the face of that reality? In other words, won't I defend against truth ultimately, or how do I face that conditioning, the root?
Yeah. John, I don't know what total freedom is, but as you begin to inquire and you end illusions, the simpler illusions will go first. And the deeper illusion of being a separate ego or a separate entity may or may not go. Your perception may not go that deep into your consciousness. But if you don't begin to learn about yourself, you won't go anywhere. It will just remain where you are. So therefore it's right to attempt this inquiry into self-knowledge. And if you can, for example, realize that comparing yourself with another human being leads to a whole lot of complications in your life. It produces jealousy, it produces envy, it produces feeling of hierarchy, inferiority, superiority, pride, and all that. And therefore you stop doing that, simply because you see that it leads to complications. You're freed from all this. That's perceivable in one's own life. One may not know what total freedom is. Then, because you are not wasting your energy in all this disorder, you have much more energy now to further inquire and learn other things. So the religious quest is also regarded as a quest for gathering energy. It gathers energy by eliminating the friction, the conflicts, the sense of shame and other things which take away a lot of your energy. You sleep better. So it depends on how serious you are and how far you're able to go into this self-knowledge. And not to make enlightenment into an aim, because the moment you make an aim and wanting to go towards that, it becomes a desire process. And it will have all the consequences of any desire process, which is an ego process. So to do this just for the love of it, because that's the right thing to do. That's all. And there is no other way to change. If you know of a shortcut or something, to practice it. Yeah. Shall we end it? Well, thank you very much. Yeah, see you.